You know that incredibly specific feeling when you are lying in bed at 2 in the morning?
Oh, yeah. Staring up at the ceiling.
Exactly, staring at the ceiling, and your brain just abruptly decides to launch an entirely unprovoked attack on your psyche.
Right, like completely out of nowhere.
Yes. It usually starts small, like
Yeah.
it starts by replaying that slightly awkward, fumbling thing you said in a meeting like 3 years ago.
Oh, the worst. You cringe, you roll over, and you just try to force yourself to go to sleep.
But then the thought spirals. It mutates into this massive looming question of whether you are actually doing anything meaningful with your career.
Yeah.
And suddenly, you are having a full-blown, sweat-inducing existential crisis about who you actually are. So what do? You grab your phone,
Because of course you do.
right? You grab it from the nightstand and you open a social media app just to, numb out for a second.
Just for a distraction.
Exactly. But the first thing you see is your own profile. You see this perfectly curated, polished, incredibly put together version of yourself staring back at you from the screen.
Which is such a jarring contrast to how you're feeling in that bed.
It really is. And in the glow of that phone, you think, wait, is that me? The person with the perfect vacation photos and the clever bio?
Or is the terrified, panicked person staring at the ceiling the real me?
Yes, exactly that. And, if you're listening to this right now, you've probably felt that.
I mean, it really is the defining psychological condition of the modern era, isn't it?
It has to be.
If you look at human history, we currently have more tools, more platforms, and more ways to construct a personal identity than any generation that has ever lived.
Yeah, that's true.
We have work personas, digital avatars, dating profiles, entire aesthetic moods. Yet, despite having all these
We're
mirrors...
totally lost.
Exactly. We've never felt more collectively confused about who was actually standing in front of them. We were just completely drowning in labels.
Labels, profiles, demographic analytics, they all tell us exactly who we are supposed to be, what we should buy, how we're supposed to feel.
Right.
And usually when we try to solve that 2 a.m. crisis, we look for very modern solutions, like turning to modern cognitive psychology or buying a stack of self-help books.
Or maybe just trying the latest productivity hack, like, I don't know, leaving your phone in the kitchen overnight.
Which never works for long, let's be honest.
No, it really doesn't.
But for today's deep dive, we are taking a wildly different approach. We are looking at a set of notes, a genuinely fascinating document titled Smartism.pdf.
Yeah, this document is something else.
It really is. And let me be clear right out of the gate.
Yeah.
This is not some dusty academic textbook translated from ancient crumbling scripts that's going to put you to sleep.
Not at all.
It is written by an absolute insider. The author is someone who actually grew up immersed in this ancient Hindu tradition.
But who explains its deepest metaphysical concepts using the language of, like, video games and sports rosters and Spotify playlists?
Yes. Reading this document feels exactly like sitting on a couch at 1 a.m. having a conversation with that one brilliantly annoying friend who always manages to completely blow your mind.
Which is exactly the genius of this source material, And it's why it is so compelling to unpack today.
Right.
Because beneath the modern slang and the relatable humor and the very casual tone of the author lies one of the most rigorous, intellectually demanding philosophies in all of human history.
Advaita Vedanta.
Exactly, Advaita Vedanta. This is a system of non-dual philosophy that goes back thousands of years.
But by stripping away the heavy, archaic language that usually surrounds these texts, the author forces us to confront something much more immediate.
Right. They force us to look at the actual raw psychology of the belief system and how it directly applies to that 2 a.m. panic you just described.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to explore this framework from top to bottom.
It's quite a journey.
It is. And I promise you, if you are listening to this on your commute or while you're doing the dishes by the end of this conversation, you are going to understand a concept of reality that might completely reframe how you view your own identity.
Their daily anxieties.
And yes, even those curated social media profiles you've been obsessing over. So I want to jump right into what the author of the notes calls the ultimate plot twist.
This is such a great starting point.
Okay, let's unpack this. The document starts by defining what Smartism actually is. It's a specific tradition within the broader umbrella of Hinduism.
Right.
But it has this very distinct, almost meta-level take on the concept of God and reality.
What is immediately fascinating here is how Smartism handles the concept of diversity and plurality.
Yeah, explain that because it's so different from what we usually see.
Well, when most people in the West, or even casual observers globally, think of Hinduism, they immediately picture a vast, vibrant pantheon of gods and goddesses.
Right. You have Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, Ganesha, Surya, and countless others.
Exactly. And historically, human beings and human religions have a very specific psychological tendency.
We like to rank things.
We do. When we look at a crowded field of divine figures, our instinct is to create a hierarchy. We want to ask, okay, but who's the best? Who is actually in charge?
Like, who is the ultimate supreme being and who are just the subordinates?
Precisely. But Smartism approaches this entirely differently. It embraces multiple deities, not as competing ultimate realities and not as a hierarchy.
But as different, equal expressions of one singular, formless reality.
Called Brahman, yes.
The author uses this incredible analogy early on that just immediately clicked for me.
The playlist analogy.
Yes, the playlist. They say, if the vast landscape of Hinduism is a massive multi-genre music playlist, Smartism is that one friend who looks at you while you're stressing over what to play and says, why are you trying to pick just one track when the entire album is fire?
It's such a brilliant way to phrase it.
It really is. You don't have to choose just one to the exclusion of all the others. They are all just different remixes of the exact same underlying sonic truth.
Or to use another one of the author's analogies, it's like a sports team. Brahman is the full team, the entire underlying franchise.
Right. And the individual gods are the different star players on the roster.
Exactly. You can absolutely have a favorite player whose jersey you wear, but you are ultimately cheering for the whole squad.
But we need to define this concept of Brahman carefully, right? Because it is where the philosophy takes a sharp turn from what many listeners might be used to.
We do. Brahman is not a person. It is not an entity sitting on a cloud passing judgment.
So no big guy with a beard in the sky.
No, not at all. It has no gender, no form, no specific location in space or time. It is the fundamental, infinite, vibrating reality of all things.
It is the bedrock of existence itself.
Yes. And the plot twist the author refers to as the absolute core philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. The word Advaita translates roughly to not to. Non-duality. Exactly. It asserts that at the absolute deepest, most fundamental, microscopic and macroscopic level, your individual personal self, what's called the Atman.
Okay, the Atman.
Yes, the Atman. It asserts that the Atman and the ultimate infinite reality of the universe Brahman are exactly the same thing.
They're not just similar.
No, they're not similar. They're not just connected. They are identical. You and the universe are not two separate things.
Which is just a massive mind-bending concept to try and hold in your head. I mean, it actually makes my brain hurt a little bit to think about.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
The author says that realizing this is like realizing you aren't just playing the video game of life.
You are the console running the game.
Right. You are the console, you are the underlying code written by the developers, and you are the player holding the controller all at the exact same time.
It's a total collapse of boundaries.
But I want to push on this because it brings up a practical problem for me. If Brahman is this formless, infinite, invisible code of the entire universe, my brain literally cannot comprehend that.
Of course not. It's too abstract.
Exactly. I can't pray to a line of formless code. So are the individual gods like Shiva, Ganesha, Devi, are they essentially just different UI skins?
UI skin.
Yeah, like user interfaces on a computer screen that help us connect with an operating system our human minds can't otherwise interface with.
That is an exceptionally accurate and profound way to look at it. And it goes right to the heart of the smartest psychological genius.
Because we need something tangible.
We absolutely do. The human mind is inherently finite. By its very evolutionary design, our brains are built to understand boundaries, shapes, narratives, threats, and physical objects.
Right, we need stories and faces.
Yes. We literally lack the cognitive hardware to casually meditate on an infinite, boundaryless reality. It is simply too abstract. The mind just slides right off of it.
So the UI skins come in.
Exactly. The different deities, with their deeply rich stories, their distinct symbols, their specific characteristics, and their artistic forms, they provide a necessary tangible interface.
Smartism basically says, choose the form, choose the UI skin that helps your specific psychological makeup connect to the divine.
But never, ever forget what is running the software beneath it.
Right. The goal isn't to become someone else. It is about realizing what you already are beneath the loud, chaotic noise of your daily life.
There is a quote from the text right in this section that I think completely reorients everything.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about, the offense and defense quote.
Yes. The author writes that reaching enlightenment in this tradition is like realizing you've been playing both offense and defense your whole life against yourself.
That line is just wild to me, playing offense and defense against yourself.
If we pause and connect this to the broader picture of human psychology, think about the immense, overwhelming relief embedded in that realization.
It's huge.
If you look at the root of so much human suffering, depression, and anxiety, it involves a deep feeling of alienation. It is the feeling of me against the world or me against my circumstances.
They're me against my enemies, right?
Exactly. But Smartism gently taps you on the shoulder and suggests that the world you are fighting, the circumstances you are resisting, and the people you are competing against
Are all made of the exact same underlying code.
yes, they are fundamentally made of the exact same underlying code that you are. The boundary between you and the universe is an illusion.
Okay, wait. I need to stop you there and play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because while that sounds incredibly poetic and peaceful, it immediately brings up a massive glaring question.
Which is?
If we are already this ultimate infinite reality, if we are the code in the console, and if there is no actual separation, why does life feel so incredibly stressful?
The million-dollar question.
Right. Like, why did my brain evolve to feel this separation so acutely? Why am I lying awake at 2 a.m. worrying about an email from my boss if my boss and I are just the same cosmic code?
It's a very fair point.
If we are the universe experiencing itself, why did the universe design a system that tortures itself with anxiety?
And that brings us right into the second major section of the source material, the psychological battlefield.
Because according to Smartism, our main problem isn't what we usually think it is.
Right. The root problem isn't that we are inherently evil or that we are constantly failing to be productive.
The root problem is a massive glitch in the system.
Precisely. And this is a massive paradigm shift, depending on what framework you were raised in.
Yeah, especially in the West.
Right. In many Western, particularly Abrahamic traditions, the fundamental human flaw is framed around the concept of sin, moral failure, or a fall from grace. There is an inherent guilt.
But in Smartism, it's morally neutral.
Very much so. In Smartism, the root of human suffering is entirely different. It is ignorance.
Ignorance. The Sanskrit term is avidya, right?
Yes, avidya. But we need to be clear about what this means. It's not ignorance in the sense of forgetting a trivia fact or not reading the news.
Or failing a math test.
Exactly. It is a profound, structural, existential misunderstanding of who and what you actually are.
To borrow the author's metaphor, you have become so engrossed in the video game that you have completely confused the digital character you are playing on the screen with the actual flesh and blood person holding the controller on the couch.
That distinction is huge. It completely removes that heavy blanket of guilt. You aren't bad. You are just profoundly confused.
Profoundly confused. I love that. And the text breaks down exactly how this glitch, this avidya, plays out in our day-to-day minds, causing all of our suffering.
It boils down to three main culprits.
And as I was reading these, I felt personally attacked by how accurate they are.
They are very universally relatable.
First, there's ego, or ahamkara. Second is attachment, or raga. And the third is aversion, or devesha. Let's unpack the first one. Ego, ahamkara.
Okay, this isn't just having a big head or being arrogant,
Yeah.
right? It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. Ahamkara literally translates to the I maker.
The I maker, yes. It is the psychological mechanism that constantly constructs your sense of separate identity. It is the part of your brain that desperately looks at the world and says, I is this physical body, I am my job title, I am my bank account balance.
I am the reputation I have among my friends.
Exactly. It constantly draws a boundary line, placing me on one side and everything else on the other.
It's exactly what I was talking about with the 2 a.m. social media scroll. My hamkara is that LinkedIn profile.
Yes.
It's the part of me that believes if I lose my job title, I literally cease to exist in a meaningful way. It's like wearing a heavy, incredibly constricting winter coat, completely forgetting you have it on.
And then wondering why you were sweating and exhausted in the middle of summer.
Exactly. You think you are the coat.
That is a brilliant analogy. You are exhausting yourself trying to maintain the coat. And that exhaustion leads directly to the next two culprits, attachment, which is raga, and aversion, which is devesha.
Because once your hamkara builds this fragile, temporary identity, this coat, you have to defend it.
Right. Raga is the desperate clinging to pleasure and status. It is the desire to freeze time. You want your youth to stay. You want your wealth to increase. You want your relationships to never change.
You become completely obsessed with specific outcomes.
Yes. And aversion, devesha, is the flip side of that same coin.
Right. It is our constant, exhausting 2047 effort to push away pain, to avoid failure.
To run from any kind of discomfort or criticism that might threaten the ego we've built.
When you combine ahamkara, the fake identity, with raga, that desperate clinging, and devesha, the frantic avoiding, you get the modern human mind in a perfect, terrifying nutshell.
You're constantly reacting, constantly grasping, constantly resisting.
Smartism looks at that cycle and says, of course you are having a 2 a.m. panic attack. Of course you are exhausted. You are spending all your cosmic energy defending a temporary illusion.
And therefore, the solution to this suffering cannot be found in a simple life hack.
Right. You can't just manage your stress better. You can't just download a meditation app to become a more productive worker.
The solution has to be waking up from the illusion entirely. This is why the smartest tradition relies so heavily on a concept called jnana, which means knowledge.
Right, but I want to be really clear for the listener here because the text makes a major point of this. When we say knowledge, we are not talking about reading a Wikipedia page about Advaita Vedanta and saying, cool, I get it, and moving on.
No, definitely not.
The text maps out a very specific, rigorous psychological process to actually acquire this jnana. It's a 3-step method. First, you listen Shravana.
Is Shravana.
Then you reflect Manana, and finally, you meditate Nidikhyasana. Can you break down the mechanics of how this actually works in the brain? Because it sounds like an incredible amount of work.
It is an immense amount of work, which is why it is considered a rigorous path. Let's look at the mechanics. Shravana, listening, is not passive.
It's not just hearing the words.
Right. It means exposing yourself to the profound truth that you are Brahman, taking it in from texts or teachers, and truly hearing it without immediate rejection.
Okay, so just staying open to it.
Yes. But Shravana is useless without the second step, Manana, which is reflection. This is where you actively wrestle with the concept.
You don't just blindly accept it like dogmatic faith.
Exactly. You question it. You apply logic. You look at your own life and say, okay, if I am infinite, why did I just get absolutely furious at that driver in traffic?
Right, you pressure test it. So Manana is basically this internal philosophical debate.
Yes. You push back on your own ego until you rationally understand the philosophy.
But intellectual understanding isn't enough to stop the 2 a.m. panic.
No, it isn't. That requires the third step,
Yeah?
Nididhyasana, or deep meditation. This is the process of internalizing the truth until it shifts from being an interesting intellectual thought in your prefrontal cortex.
To a lived, visceral reality in your entire being.
Exactly. You are essentially rewriting the deeply grooved neural pathways of your ego.
Now, the text notes that this pursuit of knowledge, this jnana, is heavily supported by 2 other practices, right?
Yes. Bhakti, which is devotion, used to soften the rigid, arrogant ego. And karma yoga, which is selfless action, used to purify the mind of its selfish desires.
But jnana, the piercing knowledge of who you truly are, is the ultimate scalpel that cuts through the glitch of ignorance.
Beautifully said. And to wield that scalpel, the text says you have to cultivate a couple of very specific virtues.
The most critical one is called viveka, or discrimination.
Right. And we should clarify that term.
Yeah, if you are listening to this, forget the modern social definition of discrimination. In this context, viveka means the sharp, laser-like mental clarity to distinguish between what is real meaning, the eternal, unchanging Brahman.
And what is temporary, like your fleeting emotions, your passing circumstances, your bank account, your physical body.
Alongside viveka is vairagya, which translates to detachment. And this is exactly where I hit a wall while reading the notes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting to me, but honestly, also deeply risky.
Risky in what way?
Well, if I am actively practicing this, if I spend all this time reflecting and meditating and I use my viveka to truly realize that I'm just playing a temporary character in a cosmic video game.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Right. If none of this is the ultimate reality, doesn't that make me detached in a highly toxic way? Like, why should I care about my job?
Why care about anything?
Yeah, why should I care if I hurt someone's feelings? Why shouldn't I just quit everything, sit on a couch, eat junk food, and let my life completely fall apart because, hey, it's all just the character? It sounds like a recipe for absolute apathy.
You have just articulated the single most common and perhaps the most important critique of non-dual philosophies globally. It is the trap of nihilism.
It's a huge trap.
But the source document anticipates this, and it's incredibly precise in its response. The goal of Smartism and the true definition of vairagya detachment is not apathy. It is not nihilism.
So it's not about giving up.
Not at all. The goal is not to stop playing the video game. The goal is to play the game with absolute excellence, with more love, more joy, and more deep engagement.
Because you aren't so stressed about it.
Precisely because you are no longer playing it with the crushing, paralyzing anxiety of believing that your temporary character is all that exists. The author coins a brilliant term for this: emotional decentering.
Emotional decentering. I love that phrase. Let's dig into how that actually feels.
Think about it this way. When you achieve this state, you still feel the sharp pain of a loss, a breakup, a career failure, the death of a loved one. And you still feel the immense joy of a win.
So you aren't an emotionless robot.
Right. But because your core identity is rooted in the infinite, you are not completely permanently shattered by the loss, nor are you entirely narcissistically defined by the win. You have cultivated a built-in observer.
Okay, so you care deeply about the world, but you are not possessed by your caring.
It is the exact difference between watching an intense, terrifying movie and knowing you are safe in a theater seat versus having amnesia, forgetting you are in a theater, and genuinely believing the monster on the screen is about to eat you alive.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Emotional decentering allows you to fully experience the thrill of the movie without suffering a literal heart attack.
That clears it up completely. It's like the anxiety of modern life comes from the fact that the stakes always feel existential.
Every minor failure feels like death because we think we are the avatar.
If you can lower the existential stakes by realizing you are the console, you can actually enjoy the gameplay. You can take risks. You can love people without suffocating them out of fear of losing them.
Exactly.
But, okay, as beautiful as that is, it leads us to a massive, very practical problem.
Which is practice itself.
Yeah. This philosophy requires intense, grueling internal realization. It requires constant mental vigilance, viveka, separating the real from the fake. How does a normal person actually do this?
Right. It's not easy.
If you are listening to this, you probably have to go to work tomorrow. You have to pay your mortgage. You have to make dinner for your kids. How do you practice advanced metaphysical non-duality without abandoning your life and moving to an isolated cave in the Himalayas?
Which is what many people assume you have to do.
And that brings us to the next section of the notes, which I found incredibly grounded: the roster and the routine.
This transition from high-level abstract metaphysics to grounded everyday practice is where Smartism truly demonstrates its cultural genius. And honestly, its compassion for the human condition.
Compassion, yeah. Because trying to do it all at once is impossible.
Exactly. As the author acutely points out, if you are a beginner trying to sit down, close your eyes, and meditate directly on the formless, infinite, absolute reality of Brahman is a fool's errand.
The author uses that fantastic gym analogy here.
That's the bench press analogy, yes.
It is like walking into a gym for the very first time in your life, walking past all the light dumbbells, loading 500 pounds onto a barbell, and trying to bench press it.
You are either going to instantly crush yourself under the weight, or you are going to get so discouraged that you give up immediately and never go back to the gym.
Exactly. You need stepping stones, you need forms in order to eventually go beyond forms. And in daily practical life, Smartism offers this incredibly inclusive, structured practice called the Panchayatana Puja.
Talk about how this works, because it directly ties back to the playlist analogy from earlier.
In this daily ritual, you worship 5 deities together, usually Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, Ganesha, and Surya. But here is the brilliant part.
The arrangement.
Yes, you arrange them in a specific pattern, placing one of them in the center as your Ishta Devata, which means your personally chosen favorite deity, your personal focus.
Right.
My original thought when reading this was that it's like curating your smartphone home screen.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
You have an operating system running everything, and you have dozens of useful apps. But you take your absolute favorite app, the one you use the most, the one that makes the most sense to your brain, and you put it right in the center of the dock.
You aren't denying the existence of the other apps.
No, you are just choosing the most effective focal point for your own workflow.
That is exactly right. The Ishta Devata is the form that resonates most deeply with your specific emotional and psychological makeup.
So, if you are drawn to wisdom and removing obstacles, you might place Ganesha in the center.
And if you are drawn to the dynamic, transformative energy of the universe, you might place a Shiva or deity in the center. It allows for deep, passionate, personal devotion without ever crossing the line into exclusivity or fundamentalism.
And this deeply physical, ritualistic approach extends beyond just the arrangement of deities. It extends to art, to the sacred images known as murti, and to the recitation of mantras.
Let's talk about the mantras, because the texts make a point to clarify what they actually do.
Yeah, a lot of people might look at a mantra and just see someone chanting a foreign word over and over again, maybe thinking it's some kind of magic spell.
Which is a huge misconception. The notes describe it almost like cognitive behavioral therapy.
Right, it's very much a cognitive tool. The text emphasizes that these physical objects, these murtis and these sonic sounds, the mantras, are not idols in some simplistic superstitious sense.
They are highly engineered focal points for the infinite. The author describes mantras as tools for tuning your internal frequency.
Think back to the chaotic, grasping, anxious mind we discussed earlier, the mind caught in ego and aversion.
When the mind is scattered by 10,000 different thoughts about the past and the future, it is impossible to realize Brahman. A mantra gives that frantic mind a specific rhythmic anchor to latch onto.
By occupying the linguistic and auditory centers of the brain with a repetitive, sacred sound, the internal monologue, the voice that tells you you aren't good enough, is forced to quiet down.
It physically aligns your awareness.
And the document points out that even the physical architecture of Hindu temples is meticulously designed to mirror this exact psychological journey. This part blew my mind.
The temple layout. Yeah.
When you walk into a traditional temple, it is not just a building to hold a crowd. You are physically stepping out of the loud, chaotic, glaringly bright outer world.
And as you walk deeper into the temple, the spaces get smaller, darker, quieter, and more focused.
Until you reach the innermost sanctum, the Garbhagriha, where the deity resides. The building itself is an architectural metaphor for the journey you are supposed to be taking inside your own mind, moving from outer distraction to inner stillness.
And what is truly beautiful about this framework is how it takes the concept of the sacred and bleeds it out of the temple and into the absolutely mundane moments of daily life.
Because the practice isn't just about what happens during a highly orchestrated ceremony.
Right. It is the small, everyday rituals that keep the glitch of ignorance at bay. For instance, the simple act of lighting a small oil lamp in your home at dawn or dusk.
It isn't just about physical illumination.
No, it is an intentional, physical reminder to bring the light of awareness viveka into your mind for the day. Or consider the practice of offering food.
Yes, the concept of prasada. The author has this incredibly relatable line where they say, it's like you're just sitting down at your kitchen table trying to eat a bowl of rice.
But you take 30 seconds to offer the food, and the ritual instantly reminds you that this very moment is deeper than it looks.
It shifts your mindset from mindless consumption to profound gratitude. You are acknowledging that the food, the earth that grew it, and the body digesting it are all part of a larger, sacred exchange of energy.
It doesn't pull you away from your regular life to be spiritual. It infuses your regular, boring life with ultimate meaning.
That is the essence of living the philosophy. But we need to look at the broader implications of the system, because if we zoom out for a second, this level of structural inclusivity.
The cheer for the whole squad mentality.
Exactly. The idea that multiple paths are equally valid is actually quite rare when you look at the broad, often violent history of world religions.
Very rare. Historically, religious groups and human tribal groups in general have a very strong imperative. They want you to pick a side, draw a hard line in the sand, and declare everyone on the other side unequivocally wrong.
Human history is basically one long, brutal argument over who has the right God.
Unfortunately, yes.
So if you are listening to this, you have to be wondering, how did this incredibly inclusive, non-binary mentality actually form? How did it not get crushed?
And how did it survive in a world full of people who emphatically don't want to play nice?
Right. And that brings us to an incredibly dramatic section of the text, the group chat, where we dive into the history, the rivals, and the deep, honest tensions of this reality.
To understand how Smartism survived, we have to look at its historical crucible, which the author hilariously but accurately describes as an ancient philosophical group chat.
While the foundational ideas of non-duality exist in the ancient Upanishads, Smartism as a highly systematized, coherent tradition really coalesces around the 8th century CE.
And this was heavily driven by a brilliant, prodigious philosopher and theologian named Adi Shankaracharya.
He lived during a time of intense, high-stakes intellectual and spiritual competition across the Indian subcontinent. Let's set the scene for this, because it wasn't just people quietly writing books in libraries.
Oh, no, it was a massive, high-stakes philosophical tournament.
You had the older, highly ritualistic Vedic traditions trying to hold on to power. You had the massive rise of Buddhism and Jainism, which were radically challenging the authority of those Vedic traditions.
And then within Hinduism itself, you had various dualist schools forcefully arguing that God and the individual soul are eternally, fundamentally separate.
So the intellectual atmosphere was basically a chaotic group chat with everyone typing in all caps at the same time, arguing over the true nature of reality.
That is a very apt description. And Shankaracharya steps right into the middle of this chaotic arena. He travels extensively all across India, engaging in these intense, highly formalized public debates with scholars from all these different schools.
But his masterstroke was that he didn't just try to shout louder than everyone else.
No, he essentially acted as the ultimate unifier and systematizer. He drew deeply from the ancient texts to build an airtight logical framework for Advaita Vedanta.
To use our earlier analogy, he was the master coach who looked at all these talented, passionately arguing players and said, look, you are all arguing over different plays, but we are all fundamentally on the same team. We are all talking about Brahman.
And he didn't just talk. He built infrastructure. He established monastic centers, mathas, in the four corners of India, which created a unified intellectual and geographical network.
But the part of this history that I find most fascinating and frankly the most relevant to how we argue on the internet today is Smartism's approach to its rivals.
The in-group versus out-group dynamic.
Yes, it's truly unique. When a highly educated smartest scholar looks at another Hindu branch, say, a tradition that is exclusively devoted to Shiva or strictly devoted to Vishnu, they don't point a finger and say, you are wrong, you are going to hell.
Right, they say, you are entirely valid. Your devotion is beautiful and necessary. But your philosophical view is incomplete.
The phrase the author uses to summarize this is absolute perfection. You zoomed in, we zoomed out.
That is the camera angle analogy. Smartism walks into a bitter, centuries-old argument over which spiritual path is the absolute best and calmly says, you are all just arguing over different camera angles of the exact same scene. The scene itself is Brahman.
It is an incredibly effective intellectual maneuver because it immediately diffuses the tension. It is very hard to fight someone who refuses to call you wrong and instead just calls you a part of their larger truth.
Okay, but I have to push back on this. I really do.
Okay.
Because while it sounds incredibly peaceful and diplomatic on the surface, doesn't it secretly contain a massive amount of intellectual arrogance?
I see what you mean. If I am a smartist and I look at another devout tradition and say, hey, I respect you, you're right, but you're only seeing a tiny, limited piece of the puzzle, whereas we have the ultimate macro view of the whole infinite ocean, doesn't that quietly claim a very distinct kind of superiority?
It does.
It feels a little bit patronizing, frankly, like saying, we tolerate you because we know better, and eventually you'll evolve to realize we were right all along.
That is a remarkably astute observation, and it is a nuance that the source document explicitly acknowledges. Smartism is a philosophy that minimizes division by reframing difference as merely a matter of perspective rather than fundamental opposition.
Right.
However, underneath that inclusivity is a foundation of quiet, unshakable confidence. Smartism absolutely maintains a hierarchy of truth.
So they do think they're right?
Yes. It asserts that the non-dual realization that all is truly one is the ultimate, deepest, final truth of the cosmos. So while it validates dualistic paths and exclusive devotion as necessary, beautiful stepping stones for the human mind, it undeniably views its own non-dual realization as the absolute summit of the mountain.
It is inclusive, but it is not relativistic. It doesn't believe everything is equally true at the ultimate level.
Exactly. It says, take whatever path up the mountain you want, but we are the ones sitting at the peak.
Now, there are no strict membership checklists, no forced conversions, no excommunications. The boundary between being an insider and an outsider is entirely philosophical, not social.
But, and the text points to a very honest, very heavy tension here, we have to look at how this beautiful unifying philosophy played out in actual messy human society.
Right, because ideas don't exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. Because historically, Smartism was very closely tied to the Brahmin scholarly communities. They were the intellectuals, the elite thinkers, tasked with preserving Vedic knowledge.
And here is where we must act as impartial observers of the historical reality presented in the source document. We have to look at the gap between the philosophical ideal and the sociological reality.
It's a significant gap. Smartism acted as this incredible, unifying intellectual framework that vastly reduced religious dogmatism. The
Yeah.
philosophy makes the most radical, egalitarian claim possible. All reality is one, and absolutely everyone and everything is fundamentally the exact same divine substance at the level of Brahman.
Which sounds amazing.
It does. However, it existed within an ancient society that was highly structured by rigid caste systems, inherited social hierarchies, and very strict rules about purity and access to sacred texts.
So you have this massive contradiction.
Exactly. The profound philosophical claim of ultimate oneness was a deeply held intellectual truth, but historically it did not always translate into social equality on the ground.
So they could be one in spirit, but not in daily life.
Right. The tradition often transcended these social inequalities philosophically, within the mind of the practitioner and within the pages of the text, without necessarily dismantling them socially in everyday life. It is the classic tension of any high-level philosophy attempting to operate within a structured human civilization.
If they believed everyone was equal at the level of Brahman, did that actually translate to the streets? The history shows that, like any human institution, it struggled with that application.
Yes, the philosophy says we are all one, but the society around it was still enforcing rules that said we are definitely not treating everyone as one.
I think any listener can relate to that tension. The gap between the ideals we hold in our heads and the way society actually functions.
It's a very human struggle.
And navigating that messy, grounded reality brings us to a really fascinating detour in the source material. Right after discussing this history, the author suddenly shifts gears to examine a completely different tradition.
Shaktism.
Yes, they look at Shaktism, and they frame it as a sort of survival guide for belief systems.
This section serves as a crucial case study. Shaktism is the tradition centered on Devi, the divine feminine, and the core concept of Shakti, which translates directly to fundamental power or raw cosmic energy.
And the author uses the historical endurance and survival of Shaktism as a mirror, an object lesson for the reader about what actually makes a philosophy last through centuries of turmoil.
And this part of the document was absolutely gripping, because Shaktism didn't have it easy.
No, it faced massive existential threats. It faced heavy resistance from highly orthodox groups who looked at its tantric practices and thought they were too radical, too visceral, or impure.
Later on, it faced massive political upheavals, the devastation of colonialism, and terrible, often deliberate misinterpretation by outsiders who just looked at it and saw chaotic rituals or superstition.
Yet, against all those odds, it endured, it thrived. And the text breaks down exactly why it survived, offering 4 clear reasons that I think apply to literally any system we try to build in our own lives.
Let's go through.
First, it was rooted in direct, visceral experience. It relied on deep meditation and the physical vibrations of mantra, not just intellectual belief.
That distinction is paramount. If your belief system relies solely on intellectual rules, logical arguments, and historical stories, those can eventually be argued away by a smarter opponent.
Right.
But if your system is rooted in a direct, undeniable internal experience of energy, if you have felt the shift in your own consciousness, no one, no colonial power, no intellectual rival can ever debate that out of you.
Exactly. The second reason it survived is that it integrated seamlessly into the messy reality of daily life. It wasn't restricted to grand, expensive temples run by elites.
It lived in the kitchens, it lived in the small home altars, it lived in the daily habits of ordinary families.
Third, it adapted. It was decentralized enough to absorb local village traditions and customs rather than rigidly fighting them.
But the fourth reason is perhaps the most profound, especially from a psychological standpoint.
Shaktism survived because it explicitly, fearlessly addressed power. It addressed human ambition, drive, terror, sexuality, and internal conflict.
This is a vital point.
Sure.
Many spiritual and philosophical systems focus almost exclusively on cultivating peace, passivity, or strict morality.
And while those are vital, they intentionally ignore the raw, volatile, often dark energy of the actual human experience.
Right. Shaktism looks at the human condition and says, that raw energy, that ambition, that fear, that is also divine. Do not repress it. Learn to work with it. Harness the Shakti. It provided a framework for total human experience, not just the sanitized, peaceful parts.
If we zoom out and ask why the author included this specific detour about Shaktism in a document about Smartism, I think it's meant to be a massive wake-up call for the reader.
It absolutely is.
The author is basically holding up a mirror to you, listening to this deep dive right now and saying, look at the personal frameworks you are building to survive your own life.
Whether you are exploring Smartism or Stoicism or just trying to build your own personal moral code.
Right. If your philosophy is just an intellectual exercise, if it's just quotes you saved on your phone, it will collapse the second you face real pressure.
Yeah.
It has to align with the actual raw energy and reality of your life.
Precisely. A system only survives if it is decentralized enough to adapt to changing circumstances, yet deeply embedded in daily physical practice.
The source document notes how Shaktism utilized layered access. It offered simple, beautiful devotion for the masses and incredibly advanced, rigorous tantric practice for those who sought it.
This creates immense cultural resilience. But having established what makes a system survive, the author immediately issues a very sharp, very modern warning about how these ancient systems are often adapted today.
Yes. The warning about what the text calls aesthetic spirituality.
Oh, this part is so relevant.
That section hits so hard because if you spend 5 minutes on the internet, we see it constantly. People absolutely love the vibe of ancient traditions.
They buy the expensive crystals, they buy the yoga mats, they post the beautifully aesthetic quotes about everything being one on their Instagram stories.
But they completely bypass the actual discipline. They skip the rigorous self-inquiry, the heavy lifting of manana, the incredibly uncomfortable process of sitting with your own ego and dismantling it.
It's exactly the difference between reading a 5-page summary of a self-help book and feeling smart versus actually setting your alarm for 5 a.m., getting up in the dark and changing your daily habits.
If you are listening to this and you have a neon sign in your house that says good vibes only, the text is basically calling you out.
It is the ultimate modern commodification of enlightenment. You take the ancient profound symbols, you strip away all the demanding psychological substance, and you sell it as a lifestyle brand.
And this stark warning about superficiality perfectly sets the stage for the final and perhaps most resonant section of the document. How does a rigorously intellectual, deeply demanding ancient system like Smartism actually function in the hyper-fast, chronically online, deeply anxious modern world?
Welcome to the final boss level, the modern metagame.
Let's look at the reality we are living in right now. We are living in an era defined by constant social media identity building, chronic overthinking, and a relentless, inescapable push for materialism.
From the moment we wake up, we are told that to be happy, we need to curate a better image, we need to buy better things to express our individuality, and we need to obsessively manage our personal brand.
And Smartism pulls up to this modern, exhaustingly hyper-individualistic crisis and essentially drops a bomb on it.
It really does.
It says, hey, that highly curated online version of you, the one you were stressing over, it's completely fake. But guess what? The offline ego you were stressing over when you put the phone down is also an illusion.
Materialism doesn't work because gathering more stuff for a temporary character doesn't solve your fundamental, gnawing confusion about who is actually playing the game.
What is truly fascinating here is why the text suggests that younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, are actually increasingly drawn to this specific ancient worldview.
In many ways, despite being thousands of years old, Smartism is uniquely suited to solve the modern mindset. First, it is inherently non-dogmatic.
It doesn't demand blind faith, it demands inquiry.
Exactly. It doesn't force adherence to a single, rigid truth handed down by an unquestionable institution. This appeals deeply to a generation that is highly, and rightfully, skeptical of institutional authority.
Second, it is fundamentally inclusive. We live in a hyper-globalized world where we are exposed to dozens of different cultures and belief systems every single day.
In that environment, a philosophy that says all valid paths point to the same underlying truth feels far more rational and sustainable than strict religious exclusivity that demands everyone else is wrong.
And it completely validates complexity. Today, people feel multi-layered. We all have overlapping identities. We don't fit neatly into one single demographic box anymore.
Smartism looks at that modern anxiety of trying to define yourself and says, of course you don't fit in a box. Your true identity is infinite. Stop trying to shrink yourself into a label.
But, and I appreciate this, the document is also very honest about the internal diversity and the debates within Smartism itself. Because even within this unifying system, practitioners strongly disagree on how to actually view the modern world.
Yes, this is a crucial nuance to understand. Within the Advaita Vedanta tradition, you have a wide spectrum of interpretation regarding a concept called Maya.
Maya is often translated as illusion, right?
Often, yes. But more accurately, it means the complex, shifting, temporary reality of the physical world that masks Brahman. On one end of the spectrum, you have the strict, classical, almost ascetic view. The world is purely Maya.
So it's ultimately unreal, a distraction, and therefore you should cultivate deep philosophical detachment and withdraw from worldly pursuits.
Exactly. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have practitioners who view Maya, the world itself, as a direct, dynamic, beautiful manifestation of Brahman.
To them, the world is intensely sacred, which encourages deep, loving engagement, art, science, and devotion.
Right. It is wild to me that you can have one person sitting in absolute silence in a room trying to completely detach from physical reality because it's an illusion.
And right next to them, you have another person joyfully singing to Shiva, fully, passionately engaged in the emotion and beauty of the world. And they are both fundamentally operating within the exact same tradition.
But the text doesn't shy away from the real-world trade-offs of holding this worldview today. Because if you lean heavily into that philosophical, non-dual realization that all is one and the ego is fake, it can actually feel profoundly isolating.
I was thinking about this. Imagine walking into a high-pressure corporate office on a Monday morning. Everyone is screaming about quarterly profits, fighting for promotions, and obsessing over status.
And you are sitting in your cubicle holding the deep perspective that literally none of this is ultimately real.
It can be incredibly hard to relate to a culture that is obsessed with the very things you were trying to detach from.
That is the honest, often difficult reality of the practice. It requires a tremendous, delicate amount of internal balance. If you lean entirely into the jnana, the knowledge aspect, without balancing it with bhakti, devotion, or karma yoga, action,
You run the very real risk of becoming cold, apathetic, and emotionally detached from your fellow human beings.
Smartism demands integration. The true goal is not to escape the world into an intellectual fortress. The goal is to achieve what the author calls an inner steadiness, while living fully within the chaos.
True fulfillment in this system isn't about acquiring everything you want. It is about finally seeing through the deeply ingrained illusions that cause you to suffer.
It is exactly like what we talked about at the beginning. It's like opening Instagram, looking at your profile, and instead of having a panic attack, you just kind of laugh.
Because you realize you have been exhausting yourself trying to validate and feed a digital avatar. You have been feeding a ghost.
The text sums it up so perfectly. Smartism does not promise you financial success. It does not promise you social status. And it might not even promise you conventional, giddy, everyday happiness.
What it gives you is something much rarer. It gives you absolute clarity. Clarity about what you are, and critically, clarity about what you are not.
And when you finally realize that you aren't just the labels people put on you, the text argues that your relationships actually drastically improve.
Because when you stop reducing yourself to a label, you automatically stop reducing other people to their labels too.
You feel a much deeper, genuine empathy because you realize you literally share the exact same underlying reality.
You still experience the inevitable highs and lows of a human life. You still celebrate your victories, and you will absolutely still mourn your losses.
But, as the author notes, when you have done the work, you do so with that built-in observer, deep in your bones, that you are more than the character sweating it out on the court.
You are the player holding the controller. It doesn't make the game of life instantly easy. The game is still hard, but it makes the rules of the game profoundly, liberatingly clear.
Okay, let's bring this all together.
Today, we have journeyed through a truly ancient framework that point-blank refuses to pick a side in the great historical religious debate over who has the best God.
Instead, it chooses to completely reframe the concept of reality itself.
We looked at the glitch of ignorance, the sheer exhausting power of your own ego.
And how ancient rituals like lighting a lamp or chanting a mantra were basically incredibly effective, early psychological tools designed to keep the human mind aligned.
It is a system that acts like a philosophical cheat code for modern anxiety. It teaches you how to engage fully with the messy, beautiful game of life without ever forgetting that you are the one holding the controller.
And as we conclude this deep dive, the source text turns the focus directly back to you, the listener. It asks a vital, penetrating question that we all must ask ourselves.
What part of your own internal system, your daily habits, your core beliefs, your coping mechanisms, is strong right now, but ultimately not sustainable long-term?
Are you currently identifying too closely with your statistics, your job title, your social labels, and your reputation?
Because if your foundation is built entirely on the temporary character you are playing, it will inevitably collapse.
That is such a heavy but incredibly necessary question to sit with. If you are listening to this right now, ask yourself, are you building your life on something eternal? Or are you just updating the UI skin, buying a new coat, and hoping for the best?
And this raises one final provocative thought to consider, one that builds directly on the author's video game metaphor, but takes it into our immediate future.
Oh, this is a fascinating point.
We are currently rapidly moving into an era dominated by virtual reality and artificial intelligence. We are literally building custom digital avatars and creating entirely immersive, generated digital worlds.
We are becoming the architects of our own simulated realities.
Are we, as a species, in fact creating the perfect, literal technological metaphor for Maya the Grand Illusion?
And if so, here is the question. Will these immersive technologies finally be the ultimate mirror that helps us realize we are just the players holding the controller, completely separate from the simulation?
Or will they become the ultimate trap, the final, inescapable layer of illusion that makes us forget the real world entirely?
Man, that is a chilling thought.
Using all of our brilliance to build the ultimate distraction, just to eventually realize we were already living inside one. Something for you to deeply think about until our next deep dive.